Does National Apprenticeships Week still matter? Now, this is the question that we are going to be tackling today on the We Are Careers show with Chris and Sabiha. And you might be watching this and thinking, oh, hang on a minute, there's only one of you here. It's actually just the Chris show today. Well, unfortunately, that is because Sabiha is unwell at the moment, so she's not able to join us for this episode. So we wish her a very speedy recovery. Get well soon from everyone at the We Are Careers and CDI team, and hopefully from all of you viewers and listeners as well. But here today with me to help tackle that question of whether National Apprenticeship Week still matters, we're delighted to be joined by Gary Potts, who is Vice Principal of Business Innovation and Community Partnerships at Middlesbrough College. Gary, very warm welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me on, Chris. It's great to be here.
Well, very good to have you. And I know we're going to be diving into a whole range of kind of topics linked to that question and problem statement that we focused on at the top of the show. But before we do that, for any viewers, listeners who've maybe not come across you before or not perhaps familiar with your work, can you tell us just a little bit more about your background, your career journey, and what it is that you do now at the college?
Yes. Well, I think probably most pertinent thing is to say that actually when I left school, I was an apprentice. So I'm a poster boy for apprenticeships, I think, and and that'll be something that I'll touch on quite a lot, I'm sure, through this podcast. Yeah. So I left school and I wanted to be a policeman. A police officer was my goal in life. Didn't want to carry on doing full-time education, didn't want to go to college in that way. Couldn't join the police at 16 because you couldn't go in until you were 18. So I had to find something to do. Funnily enough, I was at my local leisure centre at a careers kind of evening, walking around, and I got speaking to a lad on a stand who worked for a big manufacturing company near where I lived, who told me about the fact that he'd been an apprentice and it was great and you could earn some money and you could carry on getting qualifications. And I thought that might be just a ticket for me to see me over until I can get in the police. I'm going to look for an apprenticeship. So that's exactly what I did. And I got an apprenticeship as a toolmaker. So again, we're going through a bit of a renaissance as toolmakers because of Keir Starmer's dad, back on the front of everybody's mind again. But yeah, so I served a 5-year apprenticeship as a toolmaker. And then when I finished that, I then moved into another role in manufacturing engineering, ended up being an operations manager in manufacturing, and a little bit of kind of luck, fate, serendipity, I don't know what you would call it. I ended up working in a college I had an apprentice who was going to college from the company that I was working with. They were actually making a chess set for a member of the royal family who was coming to open a brand new centre in the college. Their machine broke. We had the same machine in my factory, a CNC milling machine. And my apprentice said exactly that. And we always hold a spare belt because they always snap. So I actually loaned them a belt to fix the machine so they could make the chess set. And on the back of that, the college owed me a favour. So when I needed to do something I couldn't fit in the factory, I didn't have capacity, I gave the college a call and said, you owe me a favour. Can you do these bits? And I went down for a look around. And at the end of that look around, I had a job running a centre within the college. And the rest is history, really. So I ended up, I kind of moved into doing a bit of teaching on a night, which had never been part of my plan. Ended up being a kind of a full-time lecturer in a college. And then through that, I moved into various different jobs. I was a manager of higher education, and then I was kind of a head of construction, and became assistant principal, looking after all curriculum in the college that I was in. So that was, all different sectors, as well as apprenticeships, higher education, the sort of the high needs learners, etc. And then I kind of decided to do something a little bit different, and I moved to another college to be in more of an external facing role, dealing more with employers. And did that, and then from there I went on and I became principal for a couple of years at a college, but it was further away from where I lived than I wanted to be. So a great opportunity came up at Middlesbrough, so I've come to Middlesbrough as vice principal and back into that kind of external role. So I do the more demand-led type of provision. So your employer-led stuff like your apprenticeships, would fall under my remit. You've got your adult skills, boot camps, all those things that you'll be hearing about that can be done. That tends to fall under my area of responsibility. So yeah, really enjoying it. So that's a little bit of a whistle-stop tour about my career and how I ended up where I am.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I know that sort of careers professionals who are watching this will kind of recognize freely the theory of planned happenstance, being in the right place at the right time, sometimes kind of positioning yourself there through the opportunities you take or being open to opportunities. And yeah, sounds like a really sort of interesting, squiggly career path so far. And I know we're going to dig in a little bit more into that stuff as well.
Never got to be a policeman. Can you believe it? In my career, I think that ship sailed now as well. I'm 47 now, and I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen for me. But no, absolutely. With a wiggly career path, I could never have plotted where I got to. It just was never on my horizon. But it's all about being willing to keep on learning, just keep on growing your knowledge, and seizing opportunities. Be brave enough, Those who never try never fail. Just be brave enough to take the opportunity and have a go. And sometimes it won't work out for you. Just move on to the next thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I know this is going to kind of connect in a little bit to some of the kind of key takeaways we sort of focus on later in the podcast. So yeah, really interesting to hear about your career journey. And I know we're going to dig a little bit more into some of the stuff that's happening at Middlesbrough College as well as we move through the podcast. But we're going to start off, I suppose, by coming back to that question we asked at the top of the show. This is, as we kind of go live with this podcast, it is National Apprenticeship Week 2025. And we know lots of individuals, organisations, careers professionals, educators, training providers are going to be doing all sorts of different stuff across the week. And I guess the question that we're asking, with apprenticeships perhaps in general getting more airtime than they have in some areas in the past, perhaps being more kind of popular with young people, with prospective kind of apprentices, parents, carers than perhaps they have in the past. The question we're asking is, does National Apprenticeship Week still matter the same way as it used to? So I'm going to turn that question straight onto you, Gary. What are your thoughts? Does National Apprenticeship Week still matter?
Well, in my opinion, National Apprenticeship Week massively matters. As I say, I'm a huge advocate of apprenticeships. I wouldn't be sat where I am now if it wasn't for being an apprentice and everything that I learned through that apprenticeship and the great grounding that it gave me. So I think National Apprenticeship Week does matter. You're right. Apprenticeships are part of the conversation as an option. Do I think they get as much airtime as they should? Probably not. And I'll talk through a little bit about that, I think, in a minute. But the reason why I think National Apprenticeship Week is so important is I'll go back to one of my managing director when I was back in manufacturing. One of the sayings that he used to use was, the one thing that you can aim for and never miss is nothing. So I think what National Apprenticeship Week gives you a focus on is, just rather than doing what you routinely do, it gives you a week where you absolutely focus on apprenticeships. And you basically turn the dial and turn up the volume on apprenticeships and really ensure that there is a greater understanding. And when I talk about that, I mean, that could be staff in the college. That can be the students who are studying in the college at that moment in time and raising their awareness of apprenticeship opportunities. It could be school leavers who might want to find out more about their next steps when they leave school, but also about employers as well. So it's all of those aspects of it. It's about really raising the profile of apprenticeships. It's about shouting out about those case studies where you've got those real successes. As I say, I'm kind of a bit of a poster boy for it myself, because I sit there saying, look, it enabled me to do lots of amazing things in my life. But there are so many of those stories where organizations have benefited so much by bringing in new talent into the organization and shaping them to what they needed to be. Changes people's lives, them individuals who get those opportunities as apprentices who have gone on to just achieve amazing things. So for me, it gives us that moment in time to focus on shouting out about those amazing things that apprenticeships do and those amazing opportunities that they create. So I think National Apprenticeship Week is just good for that it gets everybody to focus on that, because I'm surprised every day by how many people aren't aware of what an apprenticeship is. And I talk about that from a young people's perspective. Do they really know? They'll have heard the word, but do they really know what an apprenticeship is? And also, how many employers are out there who don't really understand about apprenticeships in the way that they could really benefit the business? So, I talk to employers a lot in my job, So what you've got at this moment in time, you've got a real kind of pinch point for recruitment of staff and retention of staff and good quality staff. That's hitting every business at this moment in time. So what is part of the solution to that? Apprenticeships is a huge part of the solution. So you're talking about retention of new staff. If you've got an aging workforce where you know you're going to lose a whole load of really critical skills to the business when that's coming to an end, then an apprenticeship is a great way of bringing through the next generation of talent. It's a great way of just having a pipeline of people coming into the business, understanding what you do, learning whatever that particular sector-specific skills are that are required, but they work the way you want them to work in your organisation. But also from a retention of staff perspective, you've got apprenticeships can be used for people you already employ. So it can be used to upskill, it can be used to reskill. So if you're looking to say, don't move on to that employer over there because they might pay you an extra couple of pennies an hour, or because they're new to the area and they just look shinier than we do, don't move, because we really care about you, and we're going to demonstrate that we care about you by actually training you and developing new skills, and that'll enable you to have greater accountabilities in your job. That'll enable you to take on more responsibility. That'll then enable you, hopefully, to have that high quality, sustainable career and earn more money, which I guess is why we all go to work in the future. So, I think there's apprenticeships can be used in a number of different ways by employers to not only solve that recruitment issue, but also that retention issue of staff. But how many employers really understand that that's what they could do with it? I'm not wholly sure. And how many people understand that if they're in employment, they could use apprenticeship to develop themselves? And how many young people know when they leave school that apprenticeship could give you a career for the next 20, 30, 40 years of your life?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of those things that kind of, as you say, the difference between people's perception about something and actually understanding of it, something that kind of has come up on previous episodes of this podcast with Ben Rowland from ALP, for example, was talking about, that idea that there's some pretty pervasive myths with apprenticeships around, not being able to do them once you reach a certain part of your career, not being able to do them if you've got prior education in something, but you want to move into something else. And I think that, as you say, there's kind of that, I know about them because they exist, but actually, do I really know about them? And as you said, the same could be true for prospective apprentices as it could be for employers. And I know we're going to touch on that a little bit in relation to some of the kind of, I guess, policy sort of picture around apprenticeship sort of in a second. I guess you mentioned there about National Apprenticeship Week definitely matters from your perspective. Can you share any of the stuff that's maybe going on at Middlesbrough College during National Apprenticeship Week this year?
Yeah, so our big bang in National Apprenticeship Week is we do an Apprenticeship Careers Expo. So we have a big sports hall and we kit it all out, and we will have over 50 employers who will come into the room. So it runs from I think it's 2 o'clock on the afternoon till 6 o'clock at night. So we have 50 employers in there. We have curriculum staff in there. We have our apprenticeship team who support employers and learners to get in there. We have a recruitment service that supports that process as well. So they'll all be in the room, and effectively we will get our full-time learners in there, and they will go and talk to employers about opportunities. So, what are the opportunities that are there now? What are the opportunities that are going to be there in the future for apprenticeships? They'll also get to see what current vacancies are going on, and see what apprenticeships are on offer at the moment. So it's a great opportunity just of taking it beyond this is what an apprenticeship is, to get in a room and speak to an employer who will probably tell you a little bit like what I'm saying, which is, I was once in your shoes, and actually this is what I did, and this is what it's enabled me to be able to do now. So I think it just makes things more tangible, doesn't it? All of a sudden, it becomes a real thing when you can talk to somebody who's done it. So we get that opportunity to link those employers up with those young people. So we expect that, will be at least a couple of thousand students will go through there. And then what we do is, once we get later into the day, we open it up to the public as well. So, anybody who's come to that point of leaving school can come in. And again, we've got those 50 plus employers in a room for them to come in and talk to about apprenticeship opportunities. Through the rest of the week, we've got employers coming in and doing master classes and career talks again, just to get into groups of students and talk to them sector specific. I guess more if they're studying on an engineering program, an engineering employer will come in and talk to them about those opportunities specifically. And that we're doing We're doing a number of case studies. I may well end up being one of them, I assume, of where there's been successes from apprenticeships that we can talk about, just to raise awareness of what that apprenticeship can propel you to being later in time. So, because we have a number of apprentices who've gone on and kind of started their own business in whatever on the back of it, become very entrepreneurial and done those things. So we'll be doing that. We'll be doing Q&As with those with apprentices that we've currently got on programs, so they can myth bust a little bit, I guess, and demystify some of those things that people may not be aware of. So what's it really like to be an apprentice? How does it work? How much time do you spend doing the job work? All those things. We're doing a bit of a mini competition as well, where you can win tickets to go and see Middlesbrough Football Club play. I'm a Sunderland fan, so I wouldn't necessarily say that. But, so we've got our training and recruitment service massively promoting the apprenticeship opportunities that are around at the moment with all of our full-time learners as well. So we've just got a whole load of activities across the whole of the week that are just going to focus the mind and focus the attention onto apprenticeships.
Yeah, and as you say, you mentioned earlier as well, it's that focal point, isn't it? It might come up in conversation, it might come up as part of activity you're doing across the college throughout the year, but this is a real focal point. And I remember kind of vividly going to a lot of the Leeds apprenticeship recruitment fairs in kind of years gone by, and similar sort of, as you said, that kind of buzz about actually, tangibly, practically, here are 50 employers all offering apprenticeships. It's almost like being in a sweet shop. You're like, there's so many different things that you can explore there. And actually, if you've not had that chance before as a young person, it's a great opportunity. We're going to come back and sort of bring things back now to, I think, the apprenticeship landscape itself. And you mentioned kind of in your intro, the toolmaker reference. There's a bit of a nice segue in there into the kind of current Labour government in the UK, and particularly, I guess, the focus around skills and the focus around apprenticeships. And we've been hearing quite a lot of different things recently in the news. Again, not maybe full detail, but proposals around introduction of foundation apprenticeships, possible kind of issues around sort of funding, or what funding is going to be used for different types of apprenticeships at different levels, and the move from the apprenticeship levy to the growth and skills levy. So quite a lot of different conversations centered around sort of skills and apprenticeships. I guess from kind of your perspective, in terms of what's happening at the moment, or what you've seen from what's happening with policies across government, where do you feel there are maybe still challenges, I guess, in the apprenticeships landscape, and where are there maybe kind of opportunities coming up?
Yeah, I could talk all day about these kind of things, and it's an ever-changing piece, as you've just said. You get a new government comes in with new thoughts, I guess. But what is really clear, I think, from the government coming in, and actually the previous government, is that they recognise that apprenticeships can be a huge driver to economic growth, because economic growth will not happen without the right skills. And to ensure that it's sustainable growth, to make sure that we can continue to develop, to become market leaders, to become world leaders in the likes of digital engineering. If we want to construct the millions of houses that the government are talking about today, you can't do that without skilled people to do these jobs. If you want the health service to be the best in the world, you can't do it without skilled staff. And apprenticeships will be pivotal in all of that, and making sure that that's a success. So there is no doubt that the government, previous and now, recognises the importance of apprenticeships within that economic growth conversation. And I guess but I do think sometimes it does get lost in the careers conversation as well still, even though it is so important. Because I go back to previous government went through a whole kind of qualification reform process, which is still rumbling on, but it's kind of got to a point where they said when a young person leaves school, they've got choices, haven't they? So they can choose to go the academic route and do A levels, which would then take you on to do a degree. Everybody kind of understands A levels. They get what the currency of it is. They understand you do 3 A levels, that gets you to that position. So you got your academic levels, your A levels. That's it. People know that, so we're keeping that. That was great. When you looked over on the vocational technical side, it was a far more cluttered and kind of confusing picture for everybody, for parents, for school leavers, for employers. So I think the government's view was quite correct to say we need to kind of declutter that a little bit. We need to organise that better and have something that carries currency and people understand. Then they went down the line of saying that at level 3, basically you would have a T level would be your option. So they said if somebody chose to do technical vocational, what you had is kind of two sides to a coin. So if you wanted to study full time, if you weren't yet ready to go into work, then you would do the technical level, the T level at level 3, which is basically carries the same currency as an A level. You effectively do 20% off the job. You do 20% on the job, which is like going in to do your industrial placement. 80% of it is kind of off the job in the college doing the kind of theory side of it. If you looked at the other side of that coin, you had an apprenticeship where you did 80% on the job and 20% off the job in the college. So they were just kind of a mirror of each other, if you like, on that vocational technical route. The problem is I just don't think that apprenticeships get talked about enough on that side of it. I think T levels do, because it's like you could go to college to do A levels, you could go to college to do T levels, or you go to college to do the other qualifications. I'm not sure that they get as much airtime to talk about really what is an apprenticeship and this is the benefit that it could hold to you. So I think there's still work to do on that, which is me just kind of tangenting off a little bit. But I do still think it needs to bubble through in schools more, because obviously we the recipient of young people coming from schools, and I don't think they understand fully what the opportunities were in apprenticeships that they could have tapped into.
Yeah, and I guess particularly, as you said, the qualification aspect, because I think one thing that perhaps careers professionals listening to this might well reflect is that often the conversations around apprenticeships can tend to be perhaps more centered around work, which, as you say, obviously is a crucial, important majority part of what an apprenticeship involves, that 80%. But actually, of course, everything is attached to a qualification. And actually, whether we talk enough, I suppose, as you're saying, about the qualification element of apprenticeships and what's involved there.
Well, the funny thing is, it's not always attached to a qualification anymore. That's the unbelievable thing about apprenticeships. It is a really complicated conversation, because once previously you had frameworks where your rule of thumb was you had a technical cert, which was a qualification, whatever that may be, and you had an NVQ. So you had your kind of technical cert, which was your theory, your knowledge. You had an NVQ, which was your skills and your competency to do the job. With apprenticeship standards, with that change in how apprenticeships are, there isn't always a qualification that's built in. You have to achieve your knowledge, which is the theory aspect. You have to achieve your skills, which is your competency, the ability to do the job, and you have to achieve your behaviours, which is how you would act within that particular sector, the expectations of how you would put yourself across in those areas. But that may not always be linked to a specific qualification or an NVQ. They may have none of that in there. You will gather all of your information of how you've demonstrated your knowledge, skills, and behaviours. You get to a gateway where that's assessed to say, yes, you now have covered all of the aspects of the apprenticeship within that. Once you get through the gateway, you do an independent endpoint assessment, which is a synoptic kind of view of tested out that knowledge and then potentially observing you doing something in practice to check that you're competent to do whatever it is that you're training to do. And sometimes it's like a professional conversation to test that not only have you got the knowledge and the skills, but you put yourself across in an appropriate way for the sector that you work in. So it's a really complicated area to actually talk to on a careers from a careers conversation side. It's what you'll get at the end, because somebody say, what's my qualification? You don't really necessarily get a qualification. What you get is a certificate to say you have done an apprenticeship at standard at that level. And do employers fully understand that yet? Probably not.
And I guess and I guess do prospective apprentices. I think that's a particularly important point, and as you say, particularly vital for career conversations, because of course, you're thinking a lot of the time, I suppose, where you're either a person facilitating this conversation, or if you are the person who this relates to, it's about your career. Often you are thinking about, where might this stepping stone kind of take me in the future? And sometimes perhaps we have kind of a traditional mindset around it needs to be a qualification because that allows me access to X, Y, and Z. As you said, it might be that it's the professional competencies that provide that stepping stone onto something else in the future. And that might include more learning or additional learning or moving on to another form of training pathway. So it's such an important point about that, the qualification not always being attached. And it links really nicely actually back to what Kim Newman was talking about in one of our previous podcasts, all about actually how complex, as you rightly say, the technical and vocational education space can be for careers professionals, young people, candidates, parents, carers, and the reason, I guess, as you're saying, to have more conversations about this and clearer conversations about what's actually involved.
That's right. Because I mean, ultimately, the aim of an apprenticeship is that at the end of your apprenticeship, you can demonstrate that you are occupationally competent, so you can perform in that particular occupation that you've been learning your trade in, whatever that may be. So, and that's why the qualifications being took out as it's not mandatory to have a qualification in there. It's about being able to demonstrate you're occupationally competent, which doesn't necessarily need a ticket of a qualification to say that. I think all of us, myself probably included, are more comfortable when you do have a qualification that you can say, look at that. But, I think that the government through standards are trying to just move away from that to say, actually, it's about demonstration of competency and ability to do a job. And that's what the apprenticeship does.
Yeah, and as you say, actually, it's interesting to see whether over time that might change more generally. We're kind of hearing sort of in a number of different countries, the move towards things like, say, in the university sector, accelerated degrees, the idea of kind of shorter or more flexible vocational technical education programs to, I guess, accommodate the fact that employers sometimes need skills development at a much quicker rate or kind of for a particular type of project. And I guess we're seeing that with some of the government stuff around the AI Opportunities Action Plan and the need to maybe change traditional pathways into some industries, including more focus on apprenticeship. So some really interesting kind of points in there. And we, as you say, could delve into that for much longer, but we are rapidly coming to sort of the end of our time on the podcast. So I suppose to kind of conclude and sort of bring all this together, I think would be really useful, I suppose, Gary, you see them of kind of apprenticeships, and perhaps from a perspective where you think sometimes these are the benefits that aren't always talked about as much. So I guess from your sort of experience, your background as an apprentice, and I guess all the roles you've done so far, what would you say to kind of any of our careers professionals who are maybe watching or listening to the podcast in terms of your perspective on the benefits of apprenticeships, and maybe some that people aren't always quite so aware of?
I mean, as I say, I speak as a massive advocate of apprenticeships because I was one, and I do genuinely say that I wouldn't be sat here without having done that apprenticeship. We all kind of, you earn and you learn, and you've got all these little kind of sayings that people use about apprenticeships. But do you know what? It's true, and they are massively impactful and beneficial, because for me, it was perfect. I left school. I didn't want to study full time anymore. And what I was given the opportunity to do at 16 years of age was to go into a workplace. It enabled me to grow up really quickly, being exposed to and around people who were working in a factory. And but I was given the opportunity to carry on my education. So I was picking up qualifications, I was picking up skills that were transferable, I was picking up those behaviours, even though it wasn't called that back in those days. So I learned how I needed to interact with different people at different levels of the organisation. And all of those experiences that came to me at a young age as somebody who left school and got put into that environment and put on a kind of a journey over 5 years, which is what my apprenticeship was, to get to the end of that as an occupationally competent person, has given me the skill set, the toolbox, whatever you want to call it, to enable me to do everything else that I've done in my life. It's given me the level of confidence that I have. It's given me a set of underpinning skills and knowledge that I've just delved into for the rest of my life, in whatever situation that I've ended up in. That rounded kind of development that an apprenticeship gives you of being put into a really scary situation, I guess, leaving school and going straight into work. But because you're on an apprenticeship, you get that level of mentoring, you get that level of support, you get that other side where you've got the college assessor who's coming in as well to kind of help you to develop your skills. Just it is a perfect way to develop somebody really quickly and early in their career to enable them to make whatever that next step is. And I, we were saying before we came on air quickly, Chris, is that one of the things that I learned through my apprenticeship was that I didn't want to be a toolmaker. That was genuinely one of the things that I learned in my apprenticeship, was that for the rest of my life, I didn't want to do that. Because I didn't like getting oil in my hair. I did have hair at one point, oil in my hair when I was working in a big press. And but that enabled me then to think about, well, what do I want to do? And so I kind of pushed myself towards getting into the design office. So I ended up moving into design, and then I moved on into management in the manufacturing industry. So it kind of, that apprenticeship will help you think about your career. And I guess coming back to the point of, is it really important for apprentices to get careers advice? Absolutely. Because they've gone into an apprenticeship, but they may well think, I want to stay in this forever. So therefore they need to understand, what are the career opportunities in this sector? What could I become? Where should I be putting my aspirations, and how do I get there? But not only that, some might be thinking, I'll do this, I'll complete my apprenticeship, but it isn't for the rest of my life. So what else could I do? What else does the world offer for me? And so for me, it's really important that apprentices understand how they're progressing, what they're doing. But if that's not for them, how do they know what else they could do? So just because they're in a job, if you like, doesn't mean that's going to be the job for the rest of their life. So it's important that they're exposed to other things. It's important that they understand that that isn't the only sector you can work in, or this is how you can get from where you are now into something else. It is so important, because as I say, my career has been all over the shop. There's been nothing linear about what I've done, but isn't that most of us?
Yeah, I absolutely. And I think it's such an important point about apprenticeships being a stepping stone. I think, we were talking about sort of before the show, there's maybe sometimes a popular image of an apprenticeship only being for someone who's perhaps more focused and they've got a clear idea of a long-term plan. And actually, as you said, absolutely doesn't have to be the case, and can very much be that sort of testing ground for initial ideas, taking stuff forward, gaining knowledge, skills and experience that can kind of be leveraged elsewhere. And as you said, particularly with kind of the actual careers advice for apprentices, as someone who's worked with a number of apprentices providing career support at different levels in the past, totally kind of relate to what you're saying with that idea that actually, there'll be some people who feel as though, I'm on this track, I don't really need to think about my future career. But actually, there's a whole bunch of things that will kind of come into that in terms of progression within that industry, progression within that company. If people potentially want to transfer or need to transfer to a different industry or different role, how do I go about doing that within an apprenticeship or after the apprenticeship? So I think all of that stuff is, as you said, it's not always kind of talked about perhaps in the same way that it is with other kind of training or education pathways. And so I think you've made a compelling case there that National Apprenticeship Week absolutely still matters. I guess if we've had any viewers, listeners listening to the podcast today who interested in finding out a little bit more about what's happening at Middlesbrough College, or finding out a bit more about your background, what's the best place for them to find you, or what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
If you want to get in contact with me, best way to do it is just find me on LinkedIn. Just search for my name, you'll find me, and just drop me a message, and whatever your query is, I'll either be able to answer it, or I will find you someone who can.
That's great. Fantastic. So what we will do, if you are watching or listening to the podcast, we will, as always, kind of put any of the resources into the episode notes on YouTube and Spotify. So that includes a link to Gary's LinkedIn, a link to Middlesbrough College, and maybe kind of some of the sort of policy related stuff we've been sort of talking about on the podcast today as well. So that brings us really nicely to the end of the show. Massive thank you, Gary, for joining us today as part of our National Apprenticeship Week special. We hope we've sort of answered the question at the top of the show. Massive thank you to everyone watching and listening, whatever platform you choose to do that on. And we will see you again next time around in the Career Sphere for another episode of We Are Careers. Take care. Have a good one.